So right now I'm just going to be harvesting or pulling some worm castings out of the bins and setting them up to dry out a little bit before I put them to the screener. So I'll grab myself a bin here. I like to use the more shallow bins for the drying out, just because I can spread the castings out over a much bigger surface area and they dry out quicker. So you don't want them super dry, but you want them dry enough so they can get through the screen. I use a 1/8 inch screen, and it makes for very fine castings, which are good for potting mix. So if you're gonna do plant some seedlings or just have some container pots. So here we are. I mean, you look at it. It has some worms in it, even though it's gone through the flow through. But probably not as much as if I didn't go run it through this bin. And definitely what I don't get are unhatched worm eggs. Those all seem to hatch out while the castings are moving through the CFT. I mean, in each of these buckets I have the worms working away at breaking down the compost that I bring in from outdoors, as well as mulched pulp newspaper, because that's the combo I use to feed the worms indoors. The reason I don't use just kitchen scraps like a lot of people will do for just a small system is I have dozens of these buckets, and it has been a challenge to keep the moisture balance, keeping fruit flies out of the system, things like that, and even odor sometimes when the system gets anaerobic. So this process of pre-composting, it doesn't have to be fully finished compost, it just has to get to the point where it's not going to stink. That's in the outside compost bins. I've just found that it's made it a lot easier to run a relatively large system. So here, a bit more trouble than normal. And I got the second bin here. Using a GoPro on a chest harness, so might make the camera shot a little bit wonky, but let's have a look here. I'll shine the light. So we still have some worm activity. Of course, the worms aren't big fans of the direct lighting, so they'll work their way down to the bottom of the bin, and in fact that'll make the harvesting process easier once things are dried out a bit more. Don't need the light anymore here. These white plastic bins, I mean, here in Canada you can just get them at Home Hardware. Probably not hard to find anywhere. They're just basic storage bins. So there we go. I put that over there. And I'll power up the fan later on. It's just not plugged in, just to keep the noise down, but I run this fan, picked it up at a garage sale for $5, and I'll run it, and just the air movement across the bin is enough to speed up the drying process. I mean, I could just let it air dry, but sometimes it's just nice to have the process going a little bit faster. Just over here really quickly, I processed one of the bins earlier, and this is some of the extract. I like to screen that stuff out because often there are worms in the bottom, and I'd rather not have them in my aeration system. And in here, I'm just going to lift the camera up a little bit. If you look in here, you can see I have some air stones, some fish water circulators. They're actually the filters for aquariums, but I've taken the filters out. And this just keeps the extract aerated. It honestly doesn't smell, but it's just nice to have a very aerobic system. Keeps all the beneficial microbes healthy. So I'll plug all that back in. So we'll turn on the fan. It's gonna get a little noisy. And you can see this is how that all works. So between the air stones and then circulating the liquid, it does a pretty good job. When I'm ready to water my plants, I just put this is a kitchen strainer with some a paint strainer cloth over it, and I'll just set that up with a bucket here, and so I do that whenever it's time to water the indoor garden or the indoor plants, or even if I'm going to water some of the vegetables outside in the summertime. And again, that keeps all the fine particulates out of the water. It won't clog up anything if I'm using a sprayer, and any worms that happen to be through there, they'll get collected, and I can put them back in the top of one of the bins. That's all I have for now. Tomorrow I'll probably just go through and scrape the bottoms of the underneath the flow-through container, just to bring down a little bit more material. It actually stays fairly well clumped. Every once in a while I'll get a collapse where the whole thing will just be like an avalanche and drop down, but it hasn't happened in a while, and I think it's just the moisture level's a little bit better. This is what the system looks like. So when I pull everything out of the buckets, they go in here. This stuff here, it's really fine, and it's actually the castings that's collected at the bottom of the worm farms. When I pour them into that liquid into the extract bucket, I get a lot of the finer sediment building up in here, and this stuff is super fine, and it's actually really great quality. So I like to separate it out and then pour it on top there, and it'll work its way through, dry out, and just be part of this whole process. All right, that's it for now.